Welcome back and welcome to our new viewers to my online seminar about shrimping in Central Florida. My name is Captain Lee Noga and I write for 3 regions of Coastal Angler magazine. The first thing I want to talk about as we develop the seminar is a couple side notes. And one of those side notes is tide charts. I get asked a lot, how do you read a tide chart? Or I'm told, oh my gosh, Captain, I went out and the tide was backwards. What I've done for you on my website at leenoga.com, I have done the tides for you. If you click on Central Florida tide charts, you will see tides South Volusia and North Volusia. If you're fishing north of Ponce Inlet to Tomoka Basin, then you would choose north. If you're a shrimper and you want to shrimp from New Smyrna south, here are the tides. All I'm going to say for now is I have done the computations for you. The further south we go down the river, the later the tide arrives. If you notice across the top, I give you the tides for Ponce, Edgewater, Marker 65, Oak Hill, and Lopez. I give you the wave height, the sunrise, the moon time, and the percent of moon visible. But let's not get that deep into it. For those that have a need for the tide chart, there it is for you. And no tide chart is truly accurate. It's all a bunch of mathematical computations and almanacs. Let's get into the seminar. This ideally is what we want to do. And my job has been, driven by great passion, to share the sport. When I wanted to learn the sport a couple of decades ago, there was nobody that would help me. I towed from Deltona back then, and I would come home with maybe 5 or 6 shrimp. I'm using my black netting, which I retrieve fish. I'm using $22 Starfire halogen bulbs I got at Walmart, and I can't understand why I'm not getting anything. I vowed, once people mentored me, if I ever figured out this sport, I would shout it off the highest mountain. And fast forward, I'm still shouting. Let's talk about tide times. Across the top, you see Ponce Inlet, Edgewater, Marker 65, etc. Where people go wrong is what they see with the times and the numbers. So let's try to make this easy. Over by my cursor on April 2015, you see a red arrow here. You see the word high. When you're looking for the tide, you always look for the word high, because what that means is at that time, the water is as high as it's going to get, which means the only thing left to do is to turn and start to go out. So it's the end of incoming. The tide is 100% in. So people get confused because they say, aren't we supposed to be shrimping on the outgoing tide, which we also call low tide? The answer is yes. But on a tide chart, that's not what that means. The word high means the water volume is at its highest, and in 30 minutes during slack tide, give or take 10, it's going to start to go out. The word low means the water is at its absolute lowest, and it's about to reach slack tide, change, and the water is going to start coming in. Because we shrimp on a low tide or an outgoing tide, and again they mean one and the same, people translate that onto a tide chart thinking low means outgoing tide, the beginning. They look at that time and that's when they show up. Sadly, they realized the tide was over when they got there. So again, look at the red arrows. The high tide means the tide is going to start going out at 7:44 p.m. at Ponce, 10:44 p.m. in Edgewater, 12:14 a.m. at Marker 65, which is about 4 miles north of the ramp, and 1:44 a.m. in Oak Hill. Lopez is about a mile and a quarter south of the River Breeze Park boat ramp. It takes 6 hours for the tide to go from Ponce Inlet through New Smyrna to Edgewater to Oak Hill. It takes 6 hours. But after you go down around marker 7, about a mile or so south of the ramp, you have to add the 7th hour. The last seminar I gave you, I talked a little bit about lights and it being hybrid and the green and white. Remember, you're on my boat for the night. Before I get into the further techniques of the lights, we're steaming down the river as we speak. You always want a shrimp in the narrowest part of the river. That helps aggregate the shrimp into a bunch. The bigger the bunch, the bigger the shrimp view will be, the more they'll be in your viewing area. You never want a shrimp in the widest body. This is why anything north of South Bridge is unshrimpable, even though those shrimp are making their way to Ponce Inlet. But you want to trap the shrimp. You want to be in the shallowest water you can be in, and you want to be in the narrowest, and that kind of bunches them up and thickens the stream so you can catch more. If they spread out and it was a thinner run, less would come your way. Some of the popular channel markers in Oak Hill begin at channel markers 4 and 5. That's probably one of the most narrow places. I always set up on the west side. You'll see a lot of people on the east side, and you're going to wonder why that is. Oftentimes, I believe it's just copycat syndrome. As the boats proceed looking for a place to go, a lot of them do what I call parasitic shrimping. They case the area, they see what's popular, and they fall in line like a good soldier. Not because that's where they were planning to go. They're there because that looks like where everybody else feels is a good area. And how is it hard not to doubt yourself and think maybe they know more than I do? And you follow. So we see a lot of flotilla buildup on the east side of the channel. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. Shrimp actually follow the architecture of the river. And there's all kinds of sunken freezers which were put there to upwell the shrimp at the end of canals. There's sunken boats. There's crevices or crevasses depending where you come from. There's all kinds of little shelves and coquina rocks and all kinds of things down below there that can cause the shrimp to navigate around and actually upwell and come up towards the top. One of the biggest indicators of that is those channel markers. And those channel markers signify there's going to be a drop-off. It's a navigational way of saying if you should go outside of the markers, you may run out of water and beach yourself. Well, think about that. Isn't that great? That does some of my homework for me. You always want to ideally put your boat where you're dipping in a shelf. And the best way to find a shelf is to find a channel marker. And if you find a channel marker, just go about 10 yards inside of it and watch the depth change. So if you like, start at a channel marker and head towards the center of the channel. And right where it drops off, pitch your anchors and put yourself. An ideal spot would be west of center, closest to channel marker 4. That will be on your right-hand side, a red marker if you're steaming south. Another popular area is around 7, 8, and 9. That's in the Lopez area. That can be pretty messy down there, and that probably has the highest concentration of boats. You wonder why that is. Well, there's a couple of reasons. We all have heard the saying, who wouldn't want the first bite of the apple? If you know 200 boats are going to be out that night that are going to line up 8 or 9 miles of that river from south of Oak Hill all the way into Edgewater, who wouldn't want to be in the first 20 boats? And that might have something to do with it. If you look at the commercial people, which by the way, people, respect them. They're just trying to pay their bills. They have these huge wing nets they deploy. But the good news is after March 1st, they can't use them and they have to use a regular frame net like we do. But these commercial people really can put a hurt on you if you're behind them. And if there's 25 commercial guys in front of you, it's going to slow the stream down. And this is a lot of the reason why a lot of people go way, way south so they can try to get out in front of all the several commercial operations when we're in the height of the season. The other thing is I happen to like the west side of the channel, so since you're in my boat right now and we're steaming to the grounds, there's really no particular spot that I go to. The problem is, if I go out into that congestion and people see that I'm there, they coincidentally mark their GPS. If I were to go back the next night, there would be 100 boats where I was the night before, where nobody was. So it really doesn't matter to me where I go. I have 8-9 miles of choices. If you know what you're doing, you can go anywhere. But as I'm steaming down with you on my boat, I tend to favor the west side. And the west side is my right side, on the side of the houses. I like the west side because there are many clam farms, and when the shrimp get cold or they want to bury up for the night, they bury themselves in the clam fields. How do I know this? The clammers tell me. This really comes into play during a lot of cold snaps, and oftentimes the clammers tell me when they're digging for clams, they see the antennas in the mud. No sign of the body, but they see the long antennas. You can believe that's a fat daddy in that mud. So from that point when the clammers educated me about the big shrimp being in the clam fields or in the mud, I have always set up on the west side. I figure why go to the east side? That's coquina rock and mangrove tree roots. Unless there's something spectacular going on, I don't see any reason to be on the east side. People often ask me, where the lagoons open up and pour into the intercoastal, in that intersection where a flat opens up and runs into the intercoastal as a T-bone, is that a good place to be? Well, a lot of people feel it is, and it's very common to see a lot of boaters play that card. But keep one thing in mind, that the flats release shrimp at different times of the year. They don't all necessarily come out of the flats at the same time or the same place. But if it makes you feel like you've got an edge, knock yourself out. But if you're not in the narrowest part of the channel, you're giving up a priority of where you believe an intersection of water flow from the flat to the intercoastal outweighs a narrow river, and it does not. So always go to the narrowest part of the river. I favor anywhere between markers 5 and 9A on the west side. Or if I'm towards the center, I'm west of center. I don't like to be in any deeper than 11 foot, so that always puts me in 10 to 11 foot on the west side for several miles once I pass marker 5. Here's the light I spoke about earlier. It's a hybrid green and white. Marker 69 sells a great light. I've been a fan of theirs forever, but it's also my partner's store. But together, we source the best lights we can, and there's reasons for that. The sport needs to evolve. You can't just throw any light like we used to think we could. Granted, many people just do that, and however that light lands is how they shrimp. But if that light lands on its side and shines to the top of the water, you've created a wall of light the shrimp won't go through. They'll have to go around it, left or right. So you never want your light laying on its side. You never want to have your light laying over your gunners being the side of your boat. That's called top-down lighting. If your lights bobble on the top water, the shrimp are going to go under your boat because the light is way too bright at the water surface. So that leaves one other choice. We have to deploy the light. We have to hold that light down with a 7-pound weight. That's what I use. And I drill it down by using a pyramid. Again, marker69.com has all of this stuff. When I throw a light, I'm extremely calculated, and I need that light to stay where I put it. I cringe when I see people hook their lights to their anchor line. The odds that your anchor is sitting where you strategically should put your light is slim and nothing. But if you're in Holliver Canal or over at Railroad Bridge, that's different. That's not tidal water, that's wind driven. And I'll do a seminar on just Brevard. But right now I'm in Volusia County. I'm in tidal water. Don't hook your lights to your ropes, ever. Remember I talked about the weight. It's very simple. I rope tie it to the shackle. We talked about the long line clip. That's how I know where, well, it's not how I know, it's how I shorten my line so that my light can sit perfectly in the depth of water I'm in. Where's my clip? 6 inches below that black spring relief. A spring relief, that black coil of plastic near the white coupling, allows for people to bend the cord without damaging it. People ask me when I have multiple lights out and each light has 3 alligator clips, how do I balance multiple clips on the little battery terminals right here and right, I apologize, there. Here's an adapter piece you can buy at Walmart or big box retail that goes on the big terminal, and it gives you a little screw fitting with the wing nut. I got a little plate of aluminum, I put it on the drill press, and I can make it as long as I want. I made this one small for instructional purposes, but I can put the clips on this panel. Whatever you do, don't let the two touch, meaning the positive and the negative. This is how I balance multiple alligator clips on my terminal. Nothing is worse when one pops off because it takes all your lights out and you go black. So make a little aluminum plate and put your clips on that. The basics of lighting are not complicated, but they're very important. I will be getting into some of the advanced techniques on another video. For now, I'm going to give you an overview, because if I lose you now, you won't get the full grasp of the more technical strategies I'll teach you in later videos. One of the biggest problems that I see are people put their lights too close to the top of the water. They're too high in the water column. They just throw them, and how they land without any thought to where in that water column that light should be. Does it matter? You bet it does. If that light is really, really high near the top of the water, as you see right here, the shrimp can only go underneath of it. It won't go above it. They won't go through it. And if you look at your light in the water and you have a very hot core intensity center that's really illuminated, that's your first clue that your lights are too high in the water. Believe it or not, shrimp behavior tell me everything. If I deploy a light and I watch them running my edges of my light field, they're telling me that my light field is too bright and that is the darkest part of my light field, and they will always swim your darkest light field part. So when you see them running your edges, a lot of people hyperextend to get them when they're 9 to 10 feet away, and some people fall into the river. You should never have to hyperextend like that. That's a symptom of a poor lighting problem. It's a symptom of a problem. The shrimp should go over your lights evenly and not run just your edges. Some people just drop their lights in. That's not always a bad thing. If you have a strong north wind in Oak Hill and Edgewater, you're not going to be able to see through the chop, and you would want to set your lights very close to the boat. I call that a tight set. But if that's not the case, then this is a no bueno, because this makes your light field very small and you can't see very far out, which means you don't get much notice. So you always want to throw your lights out far enough where the circle of light still grazes your boat, but you have a vast amount of water lit per light. This is a perfect light field. A perfect light field is when the orb of light, which typically can be 15 to 18 foot depending on the water clarity, and it will actually touch your boat and it will extend out there. Notice this that the light is down further. This creates black water above it. These lights do not shine to the top, the hybrid green and white LEDs. This is why they are the choice among consumers and myself. The light actually radiates out, and it's called a cone of light. And we figure this light is about 5 foot thick. And what we know is we can apply a formula. And the formula is depth minus 8. You need a fish finder or sonar on your boat to know your depth. Once you get your depth, you subtract 8. You take that answer, you touch your lead, you count backwards, and you clip your rope. Again, this is all done while you're on the boat. Maybe I got ahead of myself and probably should have said this sooner. But when you throw and deploy your light, you have to set the depth of your rope. Most lights have 17 foot of 3/8 inch rope. That long line clip I talked about, that's what we clip the rope with. Let's go over this again. We're sailing down, we're between markers 4 and 5. We're probably 15 yards west of center in 10.5 foot of water. Let's just call it 11 foot. 11 minus 8 is 3. I take my light on my boat, I touch my lead, and I count back, guessing where 3 feet is, and I clip. My light is now ready to be thrown. When I grab my weight, I throw it as far as I can, and it will pull the light out of my hand so that there's no way my light can crash into my weight and break. I always deploy my lead first, and it will take the light with it. If I'm in 12 foot of water and I subtract 8, the answer is 4. I touch my weight, I count up the rope 4 foot, and I clip. My light is now ready to be right in the pocket should I be in 12 foot of water. So in our case, I'm a 10-foot girl. You just heard my phone go off. 10 minus 8 is 2. I'll touch my weight, I'll count back 2, and I'll clip off. But this doesn't mean you're done. This just starts one of 3 deployments. Why would I want to do 3? Well, the first one puts you 85% in the pocket. You're already so much better in position than most everybody else out there that doesn't have much knowledge. They're still praying that they have a good night, but I want you to be confident you are. Now, the second deployment is I want you to pull, after you do the depth minus 8, of course I want you to look at the top water and identify something, whether it be a cigarette butt, piece of paper, wrapper, grass, crab, bait fish, something that you can identify it. Pull your light in a second time and run the clip down only a couple of inches. The first deployment was depth minus 8. The second deployment is just a zhuzh, a couple of inches. Redeploy the light the second time. If you still can see things in the water, then guess what? One more time, 3 times. It takes me often 20 minutes to set my lights, and I do a minimum of 3 times. If you can see everything after deployment 2, one more time, pull the light in, and zhuzh that clip down just a few more inches. My point? I want you to dip in the darkest light field you can achieve. Why is that? Well, when we were steaming down the river together tonight, the tide was just about to be done coming in, and we predicted we were going to land at markers 4 and 5 together right at slack tide. Remember, incoming tide means the highest volume of water has just come in. And trust me, we're sitting on it. But guess what? People don't take into account that when the tide changes and goes out, the water level is going to drop by a foot. If you set your lights at slack tide, did you not set them when the tide was its highest? And if the tide starts going out, what happens to those lights when the water volume drops? Yeah, exactly. The lights get brighter and brighter. Oh my God. You're going to have 6 hours of outgoing tide, and every minute that goes by, your lights are going to get brighter and brighter. And guess what? By hour 3, your run is going to get compromised. It's going to slow down. Some people pack up and even go home. They think it's over because they haven't seen a shrimp in a long time, 10 minutes. But they don't seem to realize when they pack up and if they do go home, that other people are dipping. Shouldn't that have been a clue that there was something wrong? They're not running to your boat, but they did for the first 3 hours, and now you're going home, and everybody's dipping while you're going home. Huh. But that's pretty much where people file it. When those shrimp run, they run for 6 hours. If something has happened midway through, stop and evaluate your lights. There's something wrong. There's a problem. And the chances are your lights are too high and you're going to have to pull them in and reset them, achieving that dark light field that you can dip in. And I'm certain the run will begin. And by the way, while I'm setting up the lights here together with you, let's not dip if a boat goes by. If a boater sees you dip, they think you know something. And before you know it, they cut their engines and they pull right in front of you and anchor, and they cut your stream off. What do? Somebody's going to have to move. If you do get near another boater, offset. Don't ever get directly in front of them. That's extremely rude. This is a great light field. These are 2 lights. The light on the left is set at 9 o'clock or 10 p.m. on a watch, 9 or 10. This one, 2 to 3 p.m. on the watch, light number 2. You want to overlight the circles so that there's no dark areas of water because the shrimp will go in there if you let them. And notice that the green orbs touch the boat. That's my way of saying, come on in, I can see you, but I've given you nowhere to go but towards me. We actually manipulate the shrimp using light. We herd them into our nets, and I'll get into that in the more advanced videos. This light field is too close to the boat. It's mostly under your boat. You still can see shrimp, but you're constricted, and you're limited on how far you can see out. So it will be a timing problem, and you'll end up missing a lot. Ideally, this is the name of the game. These big guys didn't get big because they're stupid. And we use light to encourage them up and out of that safety zone at the bottom of the river. This is what we all want. We call these shrimpzillas or fat daddies. This is what we don't want. Come March, when the biomass of shrimp come running through Oak Hill, most everybody will get 5 gallons, but a majority of the 5 gallons are going to be these little guys. And when I call little guys, anything that's in the 3-inch range. Ideally, and believe it or not, my partner and I cull our shrimp, and we don't keep anything smaller than 4.5 inches. And that's our way of trying to sustain the fishery. At the end of the night, I want to go home and take home the sizes that I'm going to enjoy. Nothing makes me cringe more when people the next day discard 2 gallons of dinks because they're so small they were not worth cleaning, They're not worth the freezer space. Don't be glutty like that. Be selective. This is Captain Lee Noga from the Academy of Shrimping. We'll see you on Facebook, Florida Shrimping Academy Tips and Tricks. Thank you for watching this video, and tune in for the next ones.